Weeks of terror attacks, violence on the Temple Mount, and now a rocket launched at southern Israel from Gaza. A wave of Palestinian strikes against the Jewish state is rising during the month of Ramadan.
Israelis struck back after yesterday's rocket attack, hitting a number of Hamas targets inside the Gaza Strip. This spike in violence has many concerned that Israel is on the brink of another war. Chris Mitchell reports from Jerusalem.
Israel's Iron Dome defense system knocked down the missile, and the military retaliated by taking out a Hamas weapons manufacturing site. While no group claimed responsibility for the rocket attack, Israel holds Hamas responsible for what happens inside Gaza. The confrontation follows weeks of terror attacks inside Israel that's left 14 dead, dozens wounded, and days of rioting on the Temple Mount. Israeli Prime Minister Naftali Bennett accused Hamas of inciting the violence.
There are those who are encouraging rock throwing and the use of violence against the citizens of the State of Israel. This is a reward for the inciters, especially Hamas, which are trying to ignite violence in Jerusalem.
Itamar Marcus of the Palestinian Media Watch told CBN News back in February, PA leaders called for popular resistance.
Now, what does that mean? That means that all the PLO leadership, all the PA leadership are calling for violence of individuals with knives, with guns, and especially focused on the Al-Aqsa Mosque. So this is coming from the top.
Marcus says Palestinian Authority leaders, like the top Islamic advisor to PA President Mahmoud Abbas, have called for religious violence during Ramadan. He said Ramadan is not a month of laziness, but rather a month of activity, of effort, and of hard work. And as it also was in the life of the Prophet, a month of jihad, conquest, and victory. For the first time in decades, the Muslim month of Ramadan, the Jewish Passover, and the Christian celebration of Easter have come at the same time. During Passover, Jews have been attacked in the Old City. Palestinians have thrown rocks at buses carrying Jews to the Western Wall and stockpiled stones on the Temple Mount, where the Al-Aqsa Mosque has been the epicenter of clashes with Israeli police. On the official PA TV prayer for Ramadan, an imam declared, "Allah, liberate the Al-Aqsa Mosque from the defilement of the evil Jews."
Palestinians are a very religious people. Ramadan is the most important month of the year. When Palestinians hear this, they feel that in order to be a good Muslim, they've got to attack Israelis, supposedly in defense of the Al-Aqsa Mosque. So this is all something that's happening from the top. Palestinians wouldn't be collecting stones if they weren't being directed from their leadership to do this.
Marcus says the West needs to know what's behind the current wave of violence. He says it's not a spontaneous uprising, but orchestrated violence by the Palestinian Authority. Gordon?
Well, Chris, tell us how Hamas and the Palestinian Authority are working together on these attacks.
Well, I think you could say, actually, in one sense, they are working together because they're both trying to commit violence against Jews. But on the other hand, Gordon, they're competing to see who can be more violent against Israel. They're rivals, and they're both trying to capture the hearts and minds of Palestinians. So they're both inciting terror against Israelis and Jews. You know, Gordon, in a normal country, leaders would be competing to see who could bring peace. But after years of incitement by the PA against Israel and the commitment by Hamas to destroy Israel, the way to become successful in the Palestinian world is to have more, not less, terror. And Hamas also, Gordon, represents a serious threat to the PA. In fact, if elections were held now, more Palestinians support Hamas. They would win in any election. And that's why there's actually been no Palestinian election since 2006. And that's why Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas is actually in the 16th year of his 4-year term.
Are they actually going to declare elections? I mean, he's put it off and put it off, it seems like, forever. So are there actually going to be elections?
I doubt there will be anytime soon, Gordon. You know, last year there was supposed to be elections before the May war between Hamas and Israel, and Mahmoud Abbas actually called that off because he knew that Hamas would win those elections. He would be ousted as president, and Hamas would not only take over Gaza but also Judea and Samaria, the West Bank.
Well, let's talk about the political ramifications for the current Israeli government. So could Bennett's coalition collapse under the violence, or would it actually be strengthened?
Actually, I think it could collapse, Gordon. And the reason is because the coalition really depends on one party. It's called Ra'am, a man named Mansour Abbas, who controls that party. He's part of the coalition, and his 4 seats, they're vital to keep the coalition from falling. So right now, after the defection of one member about 10 days ago of Bennett's coalition, the Knesset split 60 to 60. And so right now, the Islamic Council of the Muslim Brotherhood, and that sort of oversees Ra'am's party, they're deciding whether or not to bring down the government. Right now, Abbas says he's, quote, freezing his relationship with the government. And the problem for Abbas right now is that he's stuck between his religious obligation, his allegiance to the Al-Aqsa Mosque, and his allegiance to the current coalition government. If he has to make a choice, he's going to go with his Islamic commitment and to the Al-Aqsa Mosque.
All right, let's talk about the wider implications for the Middle East. So what do the nations that are part of the Abraham Accords, how are they reacting to the current violence?
Well, they're reacting by condemning Israel. And right now, just like Mansour Abbas, they're caught between what's happening here on the Al-Aqsa Mosque and what their commitment is to Israel. And so they're in their commitment to either Islam or Israel, they're going to have to go with Islam. And so what's happening right now is the Palestinian Authority, by fomenting this violence, is really creating or trying to create a wedge between Israel and these Arab Accord nations. And that's by design, because they see the Abraham Accords as something that threatens the Palestinian Authority. So what they want to do is that they want to have these countries, because of the violence, especially happening on the Temple Mount and the Al-Aqsa Mosque, they want these nations to condemn Israel and turn their backs on Israel. So that's what's part of what's plays happening in the geopolitics in the wider region, all happening here in Jerusalem.
Final question. At what point do the Muslims wake up that they're getting played? That there's no threat to the Al-Aqsa Mosque. Israel has recognized all the holy sites, whether they're Christian or Muslim, has never done anything other than that. And at what point are they going to recognize this is all a play on the religious sentiment, but there's no reality on the ground?
Well, Gordon, they've been told this incitement for years and years that the Al-Aqsa Mosque is in danger. And so even though we understand that there's really no threat, Israel wants to maintain the status quo on the Al-Aqsa Mosque. They don't want to take over the Temple Mount right now. But they have been told a whole different narrative. So when you look at the Palestinian media, when you look at what Hamas says, they're seeing a whole different story. They don't see necessarily themselves being played or lied to. They believe what's being told by them, by the Palestinian Authority. And that's why we see this violence, whether it's on the Temple Mount, the Al-Aqsa Mosque, or rockets coming out of Gaza. It's almost like a whole different version of reality. And you can also say, Gordon, it's almost like we've seen this movie before. We've seen the incitement and we see what's happening, on the ground, but the reality can be a whole lot different.
All right. Well, Chris, thanks for the report. My prayer, my hope is that the Palestinians will wake up from their nightmare and understand their leaders have been oppressing them and using them for decades. There's no reason for them to stay in refugee camps. There's no reason for them not to have a hope, have a future for their children and their grandchildren. They've been fed an ideology that is based on lies.